people ask me the same question, which is, why are you starting another company? So what Pepper kept saying, what I want is my data to move faster. We started looking at that again. Okay, well, there's definitely a market here. And of course there was, except you can't make a batch ETL tool real time. We looked at this initially and we're like, okay, where are we going to innovate here? But it's been far harder than we expected. But we have a hosted version and we have a BYOC version, right? So you can run it in your cloud as well with the same level of kind of abstraction support, right? Which has huge advantages for organizations as well. Right? So what we're doing is we're abstracting away the technical complexity of it all. That just works. It's simple. A company is trying to show, there's a better way of doing things. And the difference is dashboards can stop working. People can survive a few hours without that. But the customer use cases, they're facing their own customers, right? Like it's something that's customer facing. It might be mission critical as such for them, and it might cost a fortune if it goes down. So it's easier, but without platforms like us, it's still difficult. You need to be a developer. Going back to how people used to do it to some extent, and we think that's what the future is.
Well, thank you so much, Ricky. I was really curious, we've talked to your co-founder, Paul, about the importance of real-time data. And just to give the audience, a little bit of context for you, about you. I'm really curious, like you've built and sold companies before, you've led at scale, and now you're back in the trenches. And I want to know, why StreamCap? What itch are you scratching that nobody else could?
As in, what is StreamCap about in that sense?
Yes, we can start with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think people ask me the same question, which is, why are you starting another company? So I think that's a good question also. So StreamCap is in a high level, a streaming ETL platform. So very similar to what people are using to handle their batch data, the likes of Airbyte or Fivetran, except that we're built for streaming. And then on top of just moving the kind of the extract and load, we're also doing the transform in the stream also. So kind of going back to how people used to do it to some extent. And we think that's what the future is.
When you say, I recall seeing on your website, you guys talk about batch as a comparison a lot, right? And I'm really curious because it is true that people just used to, I don't know if we call it streaming, but I wonder, do you feel like batch ETL was a problem we created as an industry that like you guys are trying to revert in a way? Like, was it actually necessary to begin with?
I think it was necessary for sure. We compare to batch because we're just trying to show, obviously a company is trying to show, there's a better way of doing things. And streaming wasn't always a better way of doing things. It was when you've got apps like a taxi service, streaming video, the traditional or fraud detection, right? Like the kind of traditional use cases that we think about with streaming. And to do that was very difficult. And so batch is, what has been much better, easier, cheaper, and that has been for a long time. But also our use cases were generally, outside of those traditional ones I just mentioned, very backward looking, right? Like it's dashboards. So if you just look at the modern data stack, we tried actually, we talked about streaming going back a while, no one was interested because everyone's like, my dashboards update every 1 to 2 hours. They already have access to real-time data out of the e-com, or let's say Google Analytics or any other underlying tool that's feeding it. And so trying to convince people to go real-time on dashboards, it has benefits, but it's only as good as the information in and what you can do with it. It just wasn't possible either. So to go back, streaming was the kind of the typical way to build those apps, as we just mentioned, as well as my background is I worked at a company called IG over 20 years ago, and that was financial trading. And so, of course, everything was real time. Now, that was really tough. We spent an absolute fortune making that work. This was before Amazon was around and other things like this. So I think batch is necessary. I just think we're hitting a time where streaming can be as easy, it can be cheaper, and use cases are going way beyond its financial fraud and stuff like this, that sort of fraud analysis. Whether it's Gen AI applications or sensors and so on, or healthcare diagnostics, like everything's moving to real time, or at least what we call fast data, faster than batch can cope with very easily.
I mean, even ourselves today, we use PostHawk for product analytics. And to be fair, our follower database that we have connected to PostHawk is delayed by a few hours, which is hilarious, right? Because we don't even have the amount of data that a company with, financial transactions may, or things that are like in the critical path. I'm really curious about your journey as a founder. I saw that you worked on training platforms, then you switched for a while on online pharmacy and medical. I'm really curious if is Streamcap the amalgamation of a bunch of experiences you've had as a builder, or how has that journey been?
Right at the start, try to think, even before IG, the trading platform, I was working for a IBM, Oracle, Veritas, Sun Microsystems reseller, like the whole shebang of the kind of internet companies, that the technologies that we use. And so I had a DBA training, I had WAN clustering, high availability training, I had Linux and IBM NQ series and all these things that are still around today. But it was kind of like how you built real-time systems, and it was tough. And the company spent a fortune. So that was my first. When I went to IG, that was my first look at streaming. But before that, at the reseller, I was also helping banks during 9/11 do real-time clustering around the world. And so the idea was that 9/11 brought people fear, right? Like, what happens if your data center blows up? Well, the data center was usually in the office building. There was dedicated data centers, but you'd often have a backup inside your own building and so on as well. So, and that was all the big banks that I used to go to. You'd have dedicated, you have DR sites and on-prem versions. So we used to replicate the data and be like, where can we replicate to that no one's going to bomb? And it was like Greece. So it was. So it's like cheap data centers. It wasn't always like that, but there was always within London, and then there was always outside of the UK, and Greece was quite popular for some reason. And it didn't have to be real time, but it was still up to date within a minute, which was fast back then, especially for sort of the banking infrastructure. And then so I did leave. We had the fastest refloat in history at that trading platform. It just exploded. Like it was just so far ahead of the competition because it was real time. It was pushing 200 price updates per second, too fast. We had to slow it down. So it was just allowed people to trade. It sounds silly, but allowed people to trade effectively in a slightly different way to what they were used to. So then I set up an e-commerce company after taking a break, which was online pharmacy businesses. So nothing to do with data streaming at all, but lots to do with analytics and understanding the customer. And so on. And at that company, I had real challenges getting the insights I wanted. And I literally, things like customer cohorts, retention, recommendation engines, this was all still fairly new back in 2006. And what you quickly learned was recommendation systems which claimed to be real time were nothing remotely like real time. It was like 24 hours ago data, and it's fine. The path you're being served would be looked up in real time. Like they've clicked on this product, now put them down this path. But there was no learning on the fly, and nothing wrong with that. It was still really far ahead. But then when I sold to another company that was VC backed, and we became the fastest growing e-commerce company in Europe as well, there was no real BI platform. We were working off, GA and spreadsheets and exports, and it was painful. So we started building our data warehouse, and this was a Tableau, SQL Server, Kimball methodology, star schemas, this sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with it again, but it was like, this is really painful. So, and we weren't advanced to think we'll start up something like Snowflake, which helps take away all the join pain, but it was, this was a problem. So then that led to, when I left there, I was thinking about, well, which problems have I had in the last few years? And initially it was customer insight. So Avora's aim initially was, well, can we make it easier to build your data warehouse without huge amounts of modeling and skills and resources? It seemed like a good idea. It did go quite well. There was other companies out there at the time, like GoodData.com and Domo, and they were smashing it at the time. And then and within that was a full BI stack. So we built the BI tool, the dashboard in house, but we had an ETL platform. So that was our kind of more introduction into batch ETL. And we tried Spark, Redshift, and so on. And they all had their problems, right? Spark at the time was immature and not suitable, but Redshift, while it was amazing at crunching data, it was initially really bad at concurrency. So you couldn't even get you couldn't get 10 people working on a warehouse very effectively unless the data was all cached. So we were really struggling with how do we update the data fast while utilizing existing technologies to provide this insight. And we struggled for years because although we could push that data fast into Redshift, and eventually we were one of the first customers onto Snowflake, you still had the problem, which was the data was constantly changing, therefore it wasn't cached, and so on. So Redshift never really solved that concurrency problem until maybe even more recently, but still didn't really solve it compared to Snowflake. And Snowflake, just swept up with that concurrency issue, and the power behind it. So so that company did raise quite a lot of money. We raised, I think, like $10 million, and had lots of success in lots of ways. We were working with the likes of Accenture, being rolled out for Shell, for Globe Analytics, and so on. Got hit really hard with COVID. Most of our customers just worked out to be retail, travel, and so on, and e-commerce in general because of my background. And of course, every e-commerce company was hit hard. And so at that point, we started taking a good look at what was it people were actually using us for. And was it really the full BI stack? And have these days long gone because the modern data stack was out and people were just decoupling all these components and then stitching them back together, right? Like there wasn't the full BI stacks like Good Data, Domo all started struggling, including us, and it all separated out the features. So what I didn't touch upon was the features we were trying to lead with at the time was anomaly detection and root cause analysis. So we didn't want to just do a dashboard. It was like, why is your why is your metric down? Give me the top 10 reasons and stuff like this. So anyway, with COVID, we spun out batch ETL called Gravity, and we focused on anomaly detection and root cause analysis, also at a dashboard layer, and said, right, we need to stop hosting the data warehouse. We need to stop focusing on the BI, the dashboard component, and try and just focus on the differentiation. And I met Paul at Avora, and when we both of them went to Gravity. And we're like, okay, well, look, people have been buying us really for batch ETL, right? Like it's hard to get data in through a lot of connectors into a data warehouse. And Fivetran was doing an amazing job. And then, but there was stitch data and, it did do well, but it had its own issues as well, right? So, and then at Gravity, it was kind of like, well, yeah, Fivetran's really expensive, but it's not such a problem. So we did quite well, but what people kept saying was, well, actually what I want is my data to move faster. So we started looking at that again. Okay, well, there's definitely a market here. And of course there was, except you can't make a batch ETL tool real time. And so long story there, but it was, as you say, like all that background and, it's right. Well, so then I started digging back into streaming, and then not much has really changed since 20 years ago at IG. Streaming's still difficult. There is no off-the-shelf platform that makes it really simple. There was Kafka, there was Confluent, but not to the likes of Fivetran, right? And my benchmark at least was, despite the bad press Fivetran gets on its pricing, I really liked Fivetran. Like it was a high-quality product that solved a lot of problems. It just worked in most scenarios. And then when we worked on Gravity, we got to see just how painful it was to maintain APIs. So we had a much higher appreciation for Fivetran at that point than probably everyone else, because we tried to build that business, and you can build it, but it costs a fortune. And so that was it really. We spoke to the investors and we said, well, we want to pivot. But by the way, it's a whole new platform. We can utilize some of the front end, but it's like a month of work, nothing much else to it. So they basically said, I think you should shut down and start again rather than just try and change everything around at this stage. Because we had other partners involved in the business as well, and it was just like batch ETL tools. who gave us unlimited licensing. And it's like, well, we have no use for these tools anymore, and therefore we have no use for their shareholding in our company. So, yeah, long story. But that basically led us to StreamCap, and honestly, the idea is to build the kind of Fivetran for streaming, something as easy to use as that.
That's fascinating, because I feel like I've had this problem at every company I've started. You reach certain critical mass where you need data into, let's call it BI, right? And I've been on Looker, on Mode, on Tableau, and you always end up in this scenario where the delay in the data is actually pretty meaningful. And once you get to a certain size, it's meaningful enough that you can't make decisions quickly on the data. Or even, I mean, I'll give you an example. We had product managers. When I was building Silo, we had product managers have to wait on the data to update, right? In order to actually test whether a recently released feature was actually, achieving the right like cohort retention. And so I wonder if this is the kind of thing, and of course, I'm almost saying this from an ignorant perspective, just to get your point of view on this, which is like, I wonder if streaming at these levels was, let's call it unaffordable or not as viable a few years back. So we created the idea that batch ETL is the way to do it. And no one really bothered to question this for like a few years. Do you think that is accurate? Or like, is it a virtue of the cost and the technology kind of like being a little bit more up to date nowadays? Like, is this possible now, whereas it would have been a little harder to do a few years back?
It's definitely easier now and lower cost, but some of that reason isn't, there's just lots of systems. The same systems, I mean, okay, we've got new systems, right? We've got it in hosted platforms like Confluent, and we've got it in free systems like Kafka. But there's not that many. If you look at all the new kind of systems that come along that claim to do real-time CDC, they're often full of bugs and issues and so on. And again, they'll get you going. And if your use case fits into that, it's great, right? But the difference is that streaming can't be done by a data engineer alone, usually. Now, maybe, right, they can follow the Kafka setup and get something going, but then are they going to rely on that for 24/7 production pipelines and be on the hook on a Friday night when it goes down? And so your next step is to look at Confluent or Amazon MSK, for example. But these have still been more infrastructure as a service, as opposed to something that I would call as easy as Fivetran. And so, yes, a data engineer then could come along and probably get them going, but they might be lacking monitoring. They have various limits. They might have rebalancing issues. There's data type bugs. I mean, you can now deploy Kafka and Debezium, and Debezium has definitely helped accelerate the world in this situation. But they might not have your connector. They might not have the supported data types, and there's lots of bugs in all software. Debezium, to be clear, are doing an amazing job, but it's just, is a data engineer really going to take that on? And so, I think the difference is you generally need DevOps. Okay, everyone's got that. Probably everyone's got a data engineer. But have they got a software engineer who's going to sit down and learn Kafka and all the work that goes with that? And just knowing Java just isn't enough. Not really. Now, again, if you've got a basic use case, that's fine. But if you want to put that in production on a Friday night, then maybe not. So then you go, okay, well, what's the use case? I want to power a dashboard that can be late by 24 hours, or, again, it's not critical. Then, okay, go ahead and try it yourself. But that's not generally what's happening. What we're seeing the uptake in streaming is different use cases, and it's not about the dashboard being real time, although you can do it. Quite often it's not actually worth the cost, right? So because you can stream the data to the data warehouse in real time now, like Snowflake. It could be there in 1 second, sub-second, but you still have to do the transformations to build those dashboards. And do you want to run that compute for that warehouse to be up to date within a minute or 20 seconds, for example, versus 15 minutes? And it's probably not worth the cost, right? And so the difference is dashboards can stop working generally, right? People can survive a few hours without that. But the customer use cases, including the customers that we're dealing with, they're facing their own customers, right? Like it's something that's customer facing. It might be mission critical as such for them, and it might cost a fortune if it goes down. So we have customers say to us, "We're using you, and we came off Amazon MSK to you because I don't want to be called on a Friday night. I need to know that these pipelines are stable." So, and I think I haven't been a user of Fivetran for a long time, but I think that's what we had at the time, right? I didn't have to worry about connectors breaking. It was the most tested solution out there. And I think that's what we're trying to provide is anyone can come along, set up a pipeline and just keep it working. And so it's easier, but without platforms like us, it's still difficult in many ways, right? Like you need to be a developer as well.
No, totally. I think that makes sense. And I think the positioning, so what I'm hearing is the position, there is an aspect of this that makes it, it's so reliable that you can put it in a production use case, which is very, very different from something that if it breaks, like you were saying, a dashboard or BI or something that just an internal stakeholder is looking at, it's okay. You may get yelled at, but you're not getting calls from the customer saying, "Hey, this is broken."
Exactly. This is the issue at the moment as well about just the adoption of streaming, right? People are, "Oh, I don't need streaming." But you don't need streaming for your dashboards, absolutely. But if you build software that is a customer experience in any way, or you want to share real-time insights back to your customers, then you will end up going to real-time, because if you don't, your competition will do it for you. And so I think that's the difference, yeah. That's what forces them to start thinking, okay, I don't want to be on the hook for this on my own, or a two-person sort of team for it.
No, completely. I think that makes total sense. I think it's funny because we actually experience the same, because all BEM does really is, if you boil it down to the essential, is to transform unstructured into structured data using vision models, large language models. Now, the thing we get a lot is, well, it's okay if it's incorrect, or if the transformation or the decisions that our system makes are somewhat correct, because there's an assumption that there is a human in the loop. And if things break, that human can take a 15-minute coffee break and then come back, or God forbid, interact with the system. And so in the advent of agentic workflows and agents, there's almost an assumption that there needs to be a human supervising the system. The difference with our system is that we are meant to be in production workflows that are customer facing. And not only that, but I mean, you've worked in the medical aspect of things. We also service a lot of healthcare customers, which means if a medical referral is wrong, then like, it's not like you can just get away with chatting with a ChatGPT and saying, "Hey, this looks wrong. Can you fix it?" That is not the access pattern. And I think that's where we've actually taken a lot of points from platforms like Fivetran when it comes to the developer experience and the access pattern. Because I think more and more I realize that one thing is the underlying functionality, and the other one is the packaging of it. And I sense when you were discussing before, hey, is there a chance that a data engineer is going to put together a whole Kafka architecture and like make Kafka work? Is the access pattern of Kafka such that a data engineer that is not a software engineer can put it together? It's a little bit difficult, right? That's when things start breaking apart.
We have a customer also streaming data to Redis, and it is for a recommendation engine, right? So, and to generate vectors and so on. We're not generating the vectors; they're doing it themselves. But it's the same principle. Who's really going to pull that together? Data engineers, developers, DevOps. It's just too complicated. You don't just send data to Redis or a vector database and it just works. There's just no such thing. So it's great we're going real time. It's great. There's all these amazing products that will help us go real time or give real time experiences, but it's just as complex as it ever was. And for most companies who don't have a dead simple use case.
That's a fascinating use case, by the way, the one that you just mentioned. Have you guys seen, I mean, especially in the advent of systems based on vector stores or vector comparisons, where there needs to be some level of caching, like using a Redis. Have you seen more of these use cases being used by customers, like sort of past the traditional data aspect of things and more into semantic workflows and search?
We haven't seen much. We have this conversation with our investors, right? We've got investors from leading databases in the world, as well as like Anthropic and stuff like this. So we kind of understand what's happening, at least based on their information. But the situation is that it just feels like there's a lot of hype, and I think agents, of course, are phenomenal. But if you look at the kind of, let's say mid-level to enterprise, I think we're not quite there yet in terms of, right, we're going to put teams onto this. It doesn't sound like to us it's that far away. And there's this whole talk about token amount exploding in the next 12 months and being able to manage fleets and things like this. So I think, we've got companies which do fleet management, payments, point of sale, retail, all these sort of recommendation engines and so on. But actually building Gen AI pipelines hasn't been as much as I wouldn't say much as we expected. It's actually what we expect. It doesn't match the hype that you would get if you're searching Twitter on agentic type systems. So what we're seeing is much more around customer facing applications, real-time intelligence on something that needs real-time, like fleet management. Now, I think that's going to change because if you can start using LLM to start helping you with that fleet management, then of course you want to start transforming that data early on. You might want to generate vectors in the stream. How do you make that even smarter and faster early on? So we only have really one, I think we've got two, but I think we've got one proper use case, which was quite early on, which was the recommendation engine. And what we do there is we bring in data from their CRM, which is the e-commerce database. It's one of the largest fashion providers in Europe. So we have the CDC data from them, coupled with real-time event data from like a GA, but for event data. Who would that be? That would be, I might come back to it in a second. And then we're bringing data from a live event feed from the website, coupled with the e-commerce CRM data. We're putting that together. We use Flink to join and transform it. And then we send that off to Redis, in effect, in a format that they want. Now, they then do, the third party does some processing on that. It's called Superlinked. They do some processing on that to then feed it into the recommendation engine and a serving layer for the e-commerce companies to then serve real-time recommendations. And it's had a massive impact. So they were using the likes of Algolia before for and others, and Emarsys recommendation engines. And that data, claimed to be real time, but it clearly wasn't. Algolia is great for them as well, by the way. They use it on search in particular. But the difference was moving to real time for them got rid of the cold start problem in recommendations, right? Which is a product has no sales history. So how do you put that in front of people that want that product? Or you think who wants that product? And of course, image analysis using LM is helpful as well, and those attributes. So anyway, it generated over 10 million in annual sales almost immediately as a run rate on 3 different A/B testing tools across different periods as well. And all that was that the recommendations were up to date within 3 seconds, end to end, and were calculated on the fly also. So it's been, that's been a great use case. I think we're seeing more of that come through, but we haven't seen as many as I'd have thought in terms of just other applications. But yeah, I think 12 months to 24 months, I think, is when we're going to start seeing more of it. And hence, I think that's when streaming has to really kick off a lot more.
We've seen exactly the same thing because, we target mostly enterprise. And I think what we're starting to notice is that a lot of the products that became mainstream around generative AI data pipelines they were not even built to support enterprise use cases or throughput or volume or complexity to begin with. The example I give to everyone is like, look, LangChain is fantastic. You won't find many, even mid-market to enterprise customers using LangChain in production. Or you won't find most enterprise customers using a unstructured.io or a Reducto in production. And so our niche has always been, hey, can we actually make, I think it's really funny because we call ourselves AI skeptics who love AI, which is like, hey, we really think this has potential, but let's be honest with ourselves. AI right now is just shitty. It does not work very well, especially if you need a high degree of reliability. I am really curious about something you mentioned. I think CDC is a fascinating concept because it used to be, and of course, I mean, this is just my own take on this, but it used to be a little bit of a niche trick for us nerds, right? Like it felt like, yeah, I can get like a CDC kind of thing going, and of course, you would always talk about CDC in the context of delayed batch, and there's always this like the fear of the unknown of like, well, what is going to happen if where you're targeting directly a production database. And I think it's really fascinating that you guys are using CDC to power real-time applications, especially applications that are in production scenarios and revenue generating flows, which is even scarier. And I'm just really curious how you guys feel that StreamCap supercharges CDC, if we can call it like that.
I think CDC was very popular a few years ago. And then it actually, I wouldn't say it's died down, but there's been some sort of skeptical view on streaming. And I think that because people are thinking about these kind of dashboard use cases and so on. But Debezium, who built a CDC platform, have done wonders for the industry. And although there's been lots of clones that have come along, I personally don't think they're anywhere near as good as Debezium, right? Debezium has a lot more back-in investment and so on. And so all credit to them for their work, for starters. And then I think what we've done is, we looked at this initially and we're like, okay, where are we going to innovate here? Because, are we actually building something, or are we just offering some hosted software? And, or are we doing a DevOps job here? We're putting together Kafka, Debezium, Flink, and new connectors and so on. There is definitely some aspect of that. But it's been far harder than we expected. The roadmap we had for the first 6 months took us like 2 years. So I think the value we add is stability for starters. I mean, well, first of all, the complexity, right? You don't even necessarily know you've got Kafka under the hood with us. And technically, we could swap it out for sure with another system. We don't explore that because we just think it's the best system, even if it is complex. It's just robust and ready for production rather than switching to a new platform. But what we're doing is we are offering a hosted Kafka platform. I didn't mention it earlier, but we have a hosted version and we have a BYOC version, right? So you can run it in your cloud as well with the same level of kind of abstraction support. Now, it is Kafka, and you can write events direct to Kafka topics and so on, right? Which has huge advantages for organizations as well, of course. But in the CDC use case that we're talking about, then people definitely sign up with us. I don't think they even necessarily know we're running Kafka. And I'm not, they might have heard of CDC and so on, but that's the point, right? So what we're doing is we're abstracting away the technical complexity of it all. You don't have to think about the number of brokers, partitions, limits, replication, any of these things, DR. What is the sort of 500 config variables that you might want to look at? And there's probably only 20 in reality, but that you do hit bugs and then start digging, well, what's the reason, or why is the pipeline slow? It's not as latency, it hasn't got the latency of 1 second. So definitely we offer this all-in-one kind of system, that kind of 5-tran level of interface that just works. It's simple. You don't need to worry about that kind of configuration. So that's definitely a major factor of what we're offering. And we've got a reasonably big team for 2 years, and we've been just hacking away at all these issues and bugs and anomalies that happen for a long time. On top of that, we've got all the monitoring and alerting. So out of the box, you don't get that much with these platforms. Like they have providers you can hook in, but again, a lot of the errors are hard to understand and so on as well. But we've done a lot of work with that. We've got real-time analytics, so real-time metrics that run in the app to the second that we've built those metrics to create that kind of end-to-end latency. So you've got that complete picture. We've got various providers you can hook up for monitoring and alerting, but probably which includes like Slack Teams, Opsgenie, and other things like this. But probably more importantly is our support team. So we have 24/7 follow the sun support. If you're a paying customer with us and it's tagged as a production pipeline, then our support engineers will proactively get notified. I say proactively, let's say there's an error or there's a latency slowdown or something like this. We get alerted the same time you get alerted, and we will wake our engineers up or call them out as such for it. So production pipeline with us means it's our job to keep that latency at that kind of 1 second. And so although you might get the alert, latency is now, let's say 30 seconds, you've got comfort knowing that our engineers are already on their way to look at it as well. And I think that's the difference, right? Like with batch, even a slowdown or a missed run, it's probably not the end of the world. You come and look at it. But if you do need fast data, who's going to respond on a Saturday night at midnight? So I think what we're trying to say is we run production pipelines without complexity. Oh, and by the way, it's lower cost, right?
That makes total sense. And I think that that is the only downside. I mean, what I hear from you, you guys in a sense made CDC work really well by not even exposing CDC to the user, right? Like it's developer experience, it's abstraction.
Yeah, definitely. So
you own it, right? And so that means you have to provide support for it. Like that's the important thing about the packaging. That's fascinating.
There is that. And actually we do have conversations internally going, okay, why did this break? Did our systems auto recover it? Because we've built a lot of software as well to auto recover the pipelines and try different things. I mean, you can get a network blip and suddenly latency alarm goes off, or it's retrying its connection. It's nothing to do with us. It could be anything in the network outside, right, at the source or destination. And we just have to make sure we recover that pipeline and do all sorts of things with it as well. So we do own it. But the setup's very easy, right? So the setup is practically the same as you configure batch. You just put in some credentials and so on. So it really is that simple. But you're right, we do own it, and hence we offer that production support level as well. I think our customers we know they really want it, because in the early days when we were a bit late getting to a problem, they were like, we demand like 1 second latency. So it's a competitive offering as well, right? In a world where there is multiple CDC platforms, it's not about potentially it could be a sort of what you call it, the sort of a race to the bottom in pricing, or who can run Debezium cheapest or whatever else. But it's far more to it than that. It's all about monitoring, alerting, ease of use, stability, and support. And I think if we think about the explosion of software that's about to come and already coming, what will be the differentiation? It's going to be support. Yeah.
Reliability, especially for you guys powering production applications. I think
exactly.
It's very I think it's super underestimated, especially by AI companies today. Especially when I talk to CIOs of larger companies or CTOs, they have the budgets. That's the thing. What they want is something that won't break in the middle of the night in something that is generating revenue. That would be so much more expensive. You mentioned your team very briefly. You guys, I mean, it seems to me, I have a lot of respect for what you guys are building, because it's both exposed in a higher level than most CDC has been in most real time. I mean, we were talking about Kafka just earlier, but at the same time, you need to own the reliability in the under the hood of the system, right? And you're giving a much more powerful chassis to a very powerful engine. And so you mentioned your team earlier, and it seems to me actually that you guys have been shipping fast and also building something terribly complex. And I'm just really curious, what is your team culture inside? What is the secret sauce, if there is any, that powers you guys and your interactions amongst yourselves and the team at large?
We've been thinking about this recently, actually, because we've taken on more engineers, and we saw the cultural kind of mismatch straight away, right? So I'm based in London. We've got engineers in London and across Europe. We've got them globally, but the kind of core engineers that were the best as such at the start, and we're here, still are, but the ones that have kind of built this platform are in Europe. And but most of our customers have been in the US, so we had to go and start hiring in the US. And we just found that, and for all the credit of US people, are very friendly, communicative, and and like to explain everything. And we just found some of the engineers didn't want to be a bother and stuff like this. Like, look, seriously, you need to be very direct, speak up about any issues. You should try and resolve it yourself, but if you spend a day, 2 days trying to resolve an issue rather than ask for help, you're not going to last here at all. We want to help you get up to speed as fast as possible. You're not going to offend anyone. If we can't help you because we're busy, we'll tell you. If we tell you if you're not good enough at something, we'll tell you should move faster. And so I'd say we've got a culture of everyone's just very focused in building. People have fun. We have our team calls and so on, but it's definitely more focused in we've got to build, we've got to hurry up, and it's got to be stable. And so if anyone tries to extend the team call a bit longer, everyone's like, look, I'm really busy, can I go? So we're in a hurry. And it's probably not for everyone. Not everyone wants to potentially be called out or an escalation at midnight and so on. But we try to be just very open, direct, great work to work on. It's very rewarding, and we try to, obviously give a lot of appreciation for everyone's efforts. And that's a combination, of course, of just how do we speak and handle people and be sensitive as well as pay stock and stuff like this. So, we're hiring engineers in America, but giving them kind of UK holiday benefits and stuff like this, right? Like, still personal health comes first, but otherwise we really expect you to work your ass off with us, and keep ourselves ahead of the competition.
That makes total sense. I think what you were mentioning earlier is that the engineers you mentioned. So one of my biggest battles when managing engineering teams has been that, and this happens, I've seen this more in American companies, that is true, is that there's almost this misconception that there needs to be optimism at all times. And if you raise a flag with an issue, then like you're being the party pooper, and no one wins to be the bearer of bad news. And what my co-founder Opal and I always tell the team is like, look, you only need one person in a team or in a meeting to raise a flag and say, hey, this is stupid. Please don't do that. But I feel like even when onboarding new engineers, there is sometimes this misconception that they shouldn't be mentioning blockers, when in fact it should be expected, right? That's actually the fastest way to grow. So it's really interesting that you guys have seen that, because I feel like especially West Coast companies in the US suffer that a lot. There's this misconception about what is optimism and what is realism. And also, I'm originally from Spain, and so I've been told that I can be too direct with people in the team. But I also think, look, when people need to be direct and stuff things out the way they are, you can be very polite and you can be very respectful, but you need to be direct, right? Otherwise, you're just using euphemisms.
We have the same problem. I'm just inherently very direct. We were in Europe. We've got Asian engineers as well who don't from their culture they even say please and thank you for anything. So it's not intentional, right? Like it's for us, if we've got people that are that sensitive, it's going to be a problem, and they need to just understand we're just busy. We care, we want to help each other, and we want to build something good. And, if you interpret someone's being direct or difficult, they're probably not. We most definitely hear they're not, because we haven't heard anyone like that. It's just, we don't spend a long time talking about it. We just talk, kind of get to the problem straight away. So
no, completely. It's never personal. It's always
exactly.
It's always something strictly about work.
Exactly.
Well, Ricky, this has been amazing. And I'm very, very grateful for your time. This has been a really awesome conversation. I am really curious, what do the things look like 5 years from now? Like, do we even have batch pipelines anymore? Or are we all living in a stream first, event driven world? Like, where do you think is the industry moving?
I don't think batch disappears. because there's just lots of data you just don't need very frequently. There's just even if it's streaming pipeline, if you keep fetching every second and there's no data for 24 hours, it's basically batch, right? Like streaming's really more, not necessarily about the process, but just how fast it processes. And data every 24 hours is still batch, even if it's on a streaming pipeline, really, in the kind of definition as such. However, I don't see us running data into data warehouses. Maybe it's not 5 years, maybe it's a bit longer. It will start this year, or it is starting this year and onto next year. But things like Iceberg and obviously just bucket storage surely has to be the way forward. The innovation there just keeps getting better and better. And although it can be costly, Amazon's getting S3 faster and faster. And of course, tools like Kafka are able to now run pretty much on top of S3 and so on. And so it just feels like that's what's going to happen. You still need the crunching and the power of data warehouses and other things like this. But I think what we think is going to happen is there's going to be a shift left for real-time use cases. And that means doing transformations closer to source, because there'll be an advantage of getting it in shape faster, cheaper than sending that data into bucket storage, or let's say Snowflake, modifying it, then bringing it back out again. This whole reverse ETL business, for me, obviously there's lots of use cases where you want to enrich records, but otherwise it makes no sense. So I think shift left, and then you're going to dump your data into multiple destinations. It could be a data warehouse, hot storage, let's call it. It is more likely to end up being in file storage like Iceberg. And then you're going to stream that live also with vector creation straight into an LLM type situation, or wherever, let's call it a LLM ops type engine. And I just imagine it's more like that. And there'll be a combination of streaming and type and sort of batch type data.
Yeah. And what's next for StreamCap? What are you most excited about?
We feel pretty happy after 2 years or 2.5 years that we've got CDC and general receiving of events and pipeline stable. Our big focus at the moment is self-serve transformations. So we are powering transformations in the stream today, but we've only just releasing an extremely powerful editor to build your own transformations. We've got Iceberg just around the corner. It'll be coming out in May or June. Yeah, and I think that's super essential for us this year. And then we're tinkering with vector streaming. So we're looking at, can we create vectors, chunk by chunk on the fly, and see if that will help power some use cases in the sort of end of this year onwards, basically.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ricky. This was awesome, and thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me.